Hi everyone! Today we're going to talk about the 4 different types of Dungeons & Dragons campaigns. I thought this would be a good video to do after my last video where I basically talk about being a Dungeon Master for the first time. So I'm not saying that this is a definitive list. I'm not saying that this is definitely the only types of campaigns that can exist. I actually started playing Dungeons & Dragons in around 1985-86. With first edition. And so I've been playing for about 30 years. And over that time, I've discovered that there are just certain types of campaigns that tend to sort of come up over and over again. The first type of campaign is what I call the dungeon crawl. The dungeon crawl, I think, is what most people are familiar with. And when Gary Gygax created Dungeons & Dragons, most of the game was focused on the dungeon crawl. And of course, when I started playing as a kid, that's basically all we did, is dungeon crawl campaigns. I wasn't even aware that there were different ways to play Dungeons & Dragons. So every time we played, it was a dungeon crawl. So the dungeon crawl is basically, you have a dungeon layout. You can use tiles, or you can draw on graph paper. And there's different rooms that the players have to explore, and hallways and passages. Usually there's a lot of combat in the dungeon crawl. There's a lot of treasure and puzzles and traps and things of that nature. Okay, now the second type of campaign is what I call the journey. And the journey is basically the characters having to move from point A to point B. And during the journey, there's different types of terrain that the characters might have to move through. So they might have to move through a forest, or an ocean, or go over some rivers, or they might have to go through a desert, or they might have to climb up some mountains. There's all kinds of different snowy terrain. And usually the goal of that campaign is to reach a certain place. And the place could be, it could be a city or a village. It might be the entrance to a dungeon, which will lead to a dungeon crawl. It might be to find a certain character that's been lost, or hunt down a monster that lives in a cave somewhere. It might be finding a wizard tower that's in the middle of a desert. So if they need to cross a river, they might have to make a jump check to jump over the river, or they might have to swim across the river, or they might have to build some sort of makeshift bridge. If they're going through a forest, they might be attacked by monsters. They go to a mountain, they might have to climb, do a lot of climbing checks. If they're in a desert, they might have to do a lot of survival checks, try to find water so they don't die of dehydration. So the next type of campaign is what I like to call the epic battle. And for people that are familiar with Warhammer, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. The epic battle is basically where you take your player characters and you put them in a situation that is similar to a huge battle or a war type scenario. So usually in an epic battle, the Dungeon Master will have a very large map. It's really useful if the DM has a lot of miniatures to represent the different units that are moving around. And you usually are going to have weaker monsters or weaker enemies, but there's going to be more of them. So instead of fighting one dragon, you might fight perhaps hundreds of orcs. And instead of only the player characters being involved in the battle, the player characters may be surrounded by lots and lots of NPCs that are going to help them in the battle. Now, usually a Dungeon Master isn't going to literally have hundreds or thousands of miniatures on the table. When I did these types of games, I only had maybe, 15 orc miniatures, but those 15 miniatures represented a lot of more orcs, and it was just the orcs that the player characters had to kill, with the assumption that the NPCs or the other soldiers are also, fighting at the same time. To make it interesting, is you're going to have various terrain pieces. So you can have trees where the characters can hide in the trees, or bushes where they can go behind cover, or they can climb up to the top of the tree. And if you have a ranged character like a wizard or an archer, They can shoot from height. There's also boulders you can place on the terrain. Another thing you can do, instead of just having two big forces just trying to wipe each other out, you can have a more specific obstacle. So for example, you can have a big castle, an enemy castle, that the heroes and an army of NPCs would have to get into that castle and sort of go over the wall and sort of defeat the forces guarding that, maybe to kill a boss or an evil king or an evil wizard, or maybe to start a dungeon crawl. Another thing is you could do the opposite, which would be where instead of the players attacking a castle, they're defending a castle or a fortress. So here, you would put all the NPCs and PCs on top of a wall or behind the wall that they would use, again, to take cover and to fire from range and to fire with advantage from height against maybe hordes of orc enemies or skeleton armies trying to get into the castles. Now, the fourth type of campaign is what I call the mystery. And the mystery is the most difficult, I think, type of campaign to do. Usually with a mystery, the players are relying more on their role-playing abilities, more on their other skills that are not combat related. For example, they're going to be using a lot more investigation, persuasion, deception, perception, those types of skills that are not necessarily combat related. There's going to be a lot of social interaction with a lot of NPCs. So that's what makes it more challenging for the Dungeon Master, is that he's going to have to come up with a lot of non-player characters, and there may be some scripted dialogue that they have to put in there. It could be like a murder mystery, like who murdered the king, let's say, or they might have to discover why something is happening, why are all the children disappearing from the village, And it may not be as easy as, well, we just have to go kill a bunch of monsters. It might be that, they have to look around and talk to people and find out what people know to get the answers to that mystery. Even though they're challenging, but I like them because they offer something different than your typical, fighting. And it's a nice little break in between all the action. It offers the players something different to challenge them mentally in different ways. So these are the four most common types of Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. But that's not to say that there aren't other types of campaigns that you can play. I would be curious to see what you guys have to say. Are there, is there a category of game that does not fall into one of these four? I'd love to hear about it, but this is usually what I do most often. Or what I'll do is I'll do some combination of these four. So it might, a game session might start off with a mystery, and then it might, in the middle of it, it might lead into a dungeon crawl. Or you might have an epic battle where at the end of it, you have to take a journey to go somewhere to fight another battle or to find a dungeon. One of these campaigns typically leads into another, and most games are a combination of some way of these four. It might be that, at the end of a dungeon crawl, there's a really huge, vast cavern where the final boss is in that room, and the final boss has an army of enemies that the players have to overcome. Or there may be, inside of a dungeon crawl, there may be a mystery that the characters have to solve inside of it. Maybe the dungeon crawl is a prison where there's a lot of different NPCs that they free from the prison, and then there's a mystery involving something that went on inside the dungeon. If you're been playing D&D for a while and you've been just doing one dungeon after the other, throwing one of these different types of games at your players is going to provide the players with some variety and something unexpected, so that they're not getting bored of the same type of game. So that's my advice, and thank you for watching.